Hi, everyone. I'm Matt Chrysler, the Program Manager for SharePoint Spaces at Microsoft. Feel free to reach out to me on Twitter at MCCRISLER. And we're here to liven up your internet with SharePoint Spaces. You can help your users be there virtually with 360-degree virtual tours. All right, everybody. Today we're going to cover three basic topics. The first is just an introduction to SharePoint Spaces, covering a little bit about what SharePoint Spaces is. Then we're going to move into two demos. The first is a demo of an avalanche awareness space that teaches people a little bit about the basics of avalanche awareness using our new 360-degree virtual tour web part in SharePoint Spaces, as well as how to design a SharePoint space to take advantage of multiple different types of content. Then we will move on to a final demo that will show how to actually create that SharePoint space, specifically assembling a 360-degree virtual tour, putting that together, linking the right images, and a few best practices associated with that. So first off, what is SharePoint Spaces? If you are familiar with SharePoint, think about this in the context of SharePoint pages, and it's just an extension that gives you a three-dimensional canvas to work with. So the intent is just to allow you different ways to tell stories and more effective ways to tell stories by giving you a more flexible canvas. That allows us to also bring in 3D models and 360-degree imagery as new content types to enhance your creativity and give you more tools as a storyteller. Importantly, this is a mixed reality product, and in many instances, people start to think mixed reality, that requires me to have a headset. I don't have a headset. That's not a problem with SharePoint Spaces. It is a browser and Teams-based experience that is available to everyone immediately and gives you the ability to graduate into using headsets to provide a more immersive experience whenever you would like. So the experience is complete within the browser. Just more immersive if you offer people the headset as an opportunity to experience it. Importantly, you also accomplish all of this within the Microsoft 365 compliance and security ecosystem. So you're within your compliance boundary. You can share and publish and manage access control with methods that you are already familiar with. So super important that you have easy tools to get the right content to the right people in 3D. All right, so now let's learn a little bit about avalanches in the context of SharePoint Spaces. So I want to kind of take you back a little bit and think through what this might mean to your organization as an enterprise. The mountains in this instance that we will visit in order to learn a little bit about avalanches could represent a facility, production, warehouse, et cetera, that many of your employees may not be able to access at any given time, or if you are a retailer, you may have many different stores that have slightly different layouts or different regional merchandisers that deal with exactly what they're going to have in a store and where that is. 360-degree images are a great tool to utilize in order to communicate the exact configuration that somebody may be experiencing, talk through that between folks at corporate headquarters and the regional folks in the field, and reach a shared understanding as to what is possible and what is achievable for their specific situation. So think of these 360-degree tours that you will see in the context of mountains as just a representation of a physical location that may be challenging for everyone at your organization to attend at any given time. So let's think a little bit first about the avalanche concept and move over here in our SharePoint space to a few images that illustrate the background of what is an avalanche and what different types of avalanches exist. Specifically, this is a slab avalanche. As you can see here, you have what's called the avalanche crown, where a bunch of snow has pulled out away from the mountain all at once and fallen down the hill. This is actually quite a small or a relatively small slab avalanche. These can get to the point where the crown is 4 to 5 feet deep or deeper, and they may break across 250, 500 feet of the mountain and go down 1,000 feet or more. So you can imagine that's a massive amount of snow that can move down the mountain quite rapidly. If you're caught in that, you can experience some traumatic injuries as well as the potential to be buried under lots and lots of snow. So these slab avalanches are often thought of as the more risky type of avalanche to experience and to be caught in. The other type of avalanche that you may experience is a loose snow avalanche. This specifically is a loose wet avalanche, or a number of loose wet avalanches, which is the type of loose avalanche that is probably the most common here in the Pacific Northwest, though we certainly have conditions where loose dry avalanches occur as well. As you can see, these are kind of point releases where a small amount of snow starts by releasing from the mountain and gathers a little bit of steam as it moves down the mountain and collects a little bit more snow as it moves down. These are often thought of as a little bit more predictable and manageable in the field, but they are certainly still somewhat dangerous in that they can knock you over a cliff or take you down the hill a little faster than you might have intended to go. So definitely want to avoid being in any type of avalanche. But generally speaking, the slab avalanches are the ones that we're trying to predict and avoid more carefully. When it comes to whether there is the likelihood of an avalanche at any given time, we start to think about the avalanche triangle, which defines 3 components of avalanches that are extremely likely to define whether an avalanche will exist at a specific spot. The snowpack defines the layering of snow that happens to be in the mountains at any given time. So over time, you have different storms that come through and drop different layers of snow. When you end up with a strong layer over a weaker layer, that stronger layer can kind of break free on top of the weaker layer and produce that slab avalanche where lots of snow moves down the mountain all at once. Weather is a significant impact both to defining how that layering happens and how it changes over time, as well as what's happening while you are out in the mountains. So if it is actively snowing, that can be a significant contributor to various types of avalanches. Also, wind can transport a large amount of snow and create wind slabs that, again, in the Pacific Northwest, are one of the more common avalanche problems that we experience. Terrain is the final component of the avalanche triangle that is often the bit that we manage while we are in the mountains, because we have the opportunity to control what terrain we enter, versus the snowpack and the weather are things that we tend to just observe. So terrain determines how steep the terrain is, and that will determine whether an avalanche is likely, as well as terrain traps and other things that determine how that snow moves down the mountain if there is an avalanche. And this all kind of surrounds the human factor and the decision-making component of a person interacting with that snow and potentially being a trigger that causes an avalanche to occur at a specific time. All right, moving on a little bit to the other side of our space over here, we'll learn about some of the tools that we use to travel in the backcountry as safely as possible and manage risk. The first is our understanding of terrain and slope angle. It indicates that between 30 and 45 degree angle slopes are where we experience most slab avalanches. It tends to be that greater than 45 degrees, the snow layering just doesn't occur in the same way, and much of the snow will fall down before those layers occur. And below 30 degrees is generally not steep enough to create conditions that are conducive to avalanches. So often we will work with topographic maps in planning ski touring in the backcountry that are a great tool to understand what type of terrain you're going to experience in a given location, but are also somewhat of a challenging tool to interpret for many people who are not deeply familiar with utilizing topographic maps. So this one is actually slope angle shaded, so you can see all of the red slope angles are kind of in that 30 to 45 degree angle range. The slopes over here where we have no shading are below 25 degrees, so very unlikely to experience avalanches in those locations. But some of the things that are really challenging are kind of translating what you see on this topographic map to what you actually experience when you're in the mountains. And that is where the 360 degree virtual tours can come in, because we can go and experience what it looks like to be in various locations in the mountains. So moving back over here, here's where I've used a 3D model that I have created from digital elevation data that allows you to see what that topographic map looks like in elevation profile. And I'll put that back there, as well as I have added a few virtual tours of the Tatoosh mountain range that allow us to go and experience what it looks like to be in various locations on that topographic map. So that area that was unshaded, you can see based on the star that I've added that shows where this image was taken. This is relatively low slope angle, and we can get a feel for what that actually looks like, as well as we can go and identify this little rock formation right here that is referred to as the castle. And that will help us to translate what this rock formation looks like on the topographic map to what that rock formation actually looks like in the real world. So that rock formation is the castle, which I have labeled using a text annotation here. And we can see that when we're standing in the middle of that North Beach slope, we can look up and see the castle. We can rotate over here and see Pinnacle Peak. And continue rotating around and see Mount Rainier across Paradise Valley. In addition to adding those little text annotations, we also have the ability with the 360-degree virtual tour web part to link these images together. So I can click on this link and it will take me up to the upper ridge where we'll get a slightly better view of Mount Rainier from a little bit higher. We can learn that we have Little Tahoma off to the right side of Mount Rainier from this view, and Paradise here, which is the one of the most visited locations in Mount Rainier National Park. Moving a little further up the mountain, we'll go just below the Castle Rock Formation, and we will see a couple more images that we have added here. Importantly, from a design perspective, this illustrates how you can utilize traditional two-dimensional imagery to add extra value into these 360-degree virtual tours. So these 360-degree tours are great at giving people the context of what and where is in a space. But often if you need to show a level of great detail or a super high quality image, it's better to take a 2D image and add that as an annotation and kind of mix your content types to help you tell your story. So this is a great view of Mount Rainier, and we can move over this direction and kind of look between Pinnacle Peak and the castle and see a great image that was taken from up at that location. And then we'll go back down to the ridge here and talk through just a bit about how we capture these 360-degree images. So this image was actually taken with a smartphone. And to capture this image, you actually take multiple photos in multiple different directions, and those are stitched together. Google refers to that as a photosphere. There are plenty of other apps that allow you to do that. And you can see that can produce a great high quality image, but it does have some drawbacks in that if you have some things that are in one of those pictures that you take, but not in others, you can end up with little ghosts like this. So you get a few artifacts if you're not super careful with how you take the images to avoid that sort of thing. You can also take images such as this one with some smaller handheld dedicated 360-degree cameras. Many of these are available from Ricoh, Insta360, and others. This allows you to capture imagery just with a single button, much simpler and faster. So if you're capturing a lot of these images all at once, you can get a tour together quite quickly using that method. So we'll exit that tour and go into one more real quickly that's a slightly more advanced avalanche scenario. You'll remember that we were talking about the red shaded slopes being where we're likely to experience avalanches. You can see we are standing above one of those red shaded slopes as we speak. And we're also able to work with the 2D imagery just like we normally would to add some additional information. In this instance, the direction of the most recent, the wind during the most recent storm and the prevailing wind. That would change our decision making in this specific circumstance, because we're often worried about wind slab avalanches here in the Pacific Northwest. In this instance, we chose not to drop in to this little run here because the wind was blowing over this ridge and depositing a lot of snow right in this area and had strong potential to create a wind slab there. So instead, we skied down right here. In a location that with the prevailing wind might have been more of a challenge for us, but we chose that route as a better spot for this specific location. So there are the tracks from my ski partner as he went down that slope, and over here would be Mount Rainier if you could see it behind the clouds. All right, so let's summarize a little bit about the avalanche awareness demo there. So with SharePoint Spaces, we use the 3D canvas to help tell our story. In this instance, we kind of combined a simple 3D model created from a topographic map with two-dimensional imagery of also that same topographic map and some images in the mountains, and then utilized the 360-degree tour to let people experience what it's like to actually be in the mountains. Again, in the world of enterprise, this could be experiencing any type of facility that your workers have to engage with, but can't necessarily be on site. We've heard many great examples of people utilizing this technology in order to onboard new employees who need to ramp up on facilities that they either can't visit a specific facility or can't visit all facilities. In our current world of COVID-19, visiting a factory facility would often be the first thing that people would do. But right now, we are very protective of that production environment from a safety perspective. So we don't allow some of those new employees to experience that. With 360-degree virtual tours, you can get that same context of what goes on in that facility, where it is, without actually being there. So that can potentially save travel costs, as well as just allowing you to visit facilities that you would not otherwise be able to visit. And now we will move on to a little example of what it takes to actually assemble one of these 360-degree virtual tours. Now we're going to come back into our space, but this time I have removed one of the tours that I had previously created for the south-facing side of the Tatoosh Mountains. And we're going to go ahead and add that back in. So consistent with how you operate with a SharePoint page, there's a nice little edit button up here that moves me into edit mode, where I can then select each of these individual web parts, or I can come up and press this little plus button where I can add a 360-degree tour web part, place that into my scene, and it will take me to the file picker where I will go and find the south side or south facing tour images that I will multi-select here, select all four of them. You will notice that I have named them 1, 2, 3, and 4. This is a great best practice as you're kind of planning a tour so that you can assemble things and they will show up in the right order when you start to edit your tour. So now that I click on the edit icon here and open my tour builder, you can see that those show up in the 1, 2, 3, 4 order that I intend. And that makes it just a lot simpler for me to put my tour together. So the first task that I have is setting up the view that I want my users to see when they first land in this tour. That's as simple as clicking and dragging to pan around, finding the view that I want them to see when we first start, and setting the starting view with the button up in the top right corner. I can then look around, see what else is in this image, and at any time, if I want to, I can go and say, what is my starting view for this image? And it will take me back to that starting view that I have set. Next task that we have is to start to link up these images so I can move, in this case, up this mountain and show you what it looks like in various different locations on the mountain. So the next image is somewhere around here, and I will click link a 360-degree image. That's going to bring my tour tray back up for me, and I will select image number 2, which is just slightly up the hill. And I forgot to enter a description. So I'll go ahead and enter that description. And then down in the tour tray, I will move into image number 2. Again, set the starting view that I am looking for in this image. And then add yet another link to the next image up, which is this nice little frozen over pond up at the top, or up near the top. Move into that pond, again, repeating that same process here. Finding the starting view that I want, maybe see a little bit of Mount Rainier looking over the pond here. And one final link that we will add that takes us up to the highest point that we get to on this tour, which is image number 4. And we'll go quickly visit image number 4 and set its starting view. Again, nice view of Mount Rainier and the Paradise Valley. Now we will head back down to the bottom by navigating through our tour tray and add a couple of things as annotations into this image. So over here we have a view across Butter Creek, and we have a view of Plummer Peak, which is actually over here. So I'm going to add an image annotation here that will give us a slightly better view of what Plummer Peak looks like. So navigating through my files here, and a cropped image with Plummer Peak that we have taken there. And we'll give it a description so that people know what they're looking at. We can also come over here and add a text annotation. This, again, is just that same process of clicking where you want to add an annotation and following the prompts that are on the screen. This is Foss Peak, roughly our destination when we go up this mountain. Not quite all the way to the peak, but pretty close. And one last thing that we're going to add here is a file. This can be a PDF and any of your Office documents, things of that nature. In this instance, it will be a PDF of an article about the hazards of confidence in the backcountry, which is especially relevant in this specific instance, in that this is actually very much an avalanche slope, though it takes a very large avalanche for the snow from the avalanche to actually reach this far down. So it's kind of one of those scenarios where it's unlikely that something is going to occur, and you very rarely get feedback that you're doing something that is potentially risky, which can change your perception of the risk and potentially lead to some overconfidence. So that article becomes especially relevant in this specific location. So now that we have assembled that tour, we can click the republish button, similar to what you would experience in publishing a page. That makes this available to anybody who has access to our site and allows me back into view mode so I can see what I have accomplished there. So you can see I can bring up that PDF with an article. I can view the text annotation that indicates Foss Peak, and same thing with the image annotation of Plummer Peak. So that's what it means to build a 360-degree virtual tour in SharePoint Spaces. In addition to that, we now want to place that 360-degree virtual tour into the proper location. For that, I'll have to get back into edit mode and adjust the parameters a little bit. So I go to edit the specific 360-degree tour, and I'm going to tell it not to show that podium. I'm going to come down to our transform bar and adjust the scale so that it's the same size as the other tours. And then I'm going to adjust its position and see if I can get that positioned against that map exactly in the spot I want it to be. Is a slight adjustment here to get it over on that south side. And I can also drag that along with the mouse and move it exactly where I want, and then make some finer adjustments here with the transform bar. So that gets it roughly into this position that I want it to be. It looks like I may have had it intersect the map a little bit, so we'll back it off just a little. Right there is where I want it. And then the other thing I wanted to show you was that you don't necessarily have to have your own 3D content in order to get started with Spaces. So it's a great way to explore, as well as a great way to add a little life to your spaces with three-dimensional objects. We have a great content library that I'm going to add a 3D model web part over here and go to the 3D catalog and search for mountain. That gives me a few different options that we have available here, and we'll go ahead and choose that one. Press insert, and it's as simple as that to place a 3D model and add a little bit of context, a little bit of flair to our space. So there's lots and lots of options, both to just explore what a space is capable of, as well as to add a little bit of context with some stock and existing content that makes it easier to get started with SharePoint Spaces. And finally, we will republish that one more time. And that's all we have to do to build a 360-degree virtual tour using SharePoint Spaces. All right, summarizing a little bit about the authoring process for 360-degree virtual tours. The first thing to remember is to plan your tour content. Follow those best practices where you number your images so that they show up in the right order, and really think through exactly what set of imagery you need. Put that all in the same place. Select it all at once so that you don't have to go back and forth to that file picker again and again. Next, add some context to your tours within the space. So in this instance, that goes back to the images that I had to describe the different types of avalanches, the topographic maps. In an enterprise use case, that may be some PDF documents that describe machinery that's in a space, or the products that are stored within a warehouse, or the layout of that warehouse, things of that nature. Use that space as a way to communicate and to tell your story, and reinforce that with the 360-degree virtual tour that allows you to actually experience that specific location. Finally, use the annotations to highlight content in the 360-degree images. So again, the 360-degree images are great at giving people a context of where things are within a space, but adding context to that with files, with text, with images is great in order to give people a real view of what is in that image and what is important and the story that you're trying to get across. And publishing and access control is just like Pages. When you're done, click the publish button. It's available to everybody who you have set up the site for. You can share that site via email using the same sharing modalities that you do for SharePoint Pages. Thanks for listening, everybody. I hope you have enjoyed our quick trip to the Tatoosh Mountain Range in Mount Rainier National Park and learn something about how to liven up your intranet with SharePoint Spaces and 360-degree virtual tours. Again, I'm Matt Chrysler. Feel free to reach out to me at MCCRISLER on Twitter. Thanks a lot.